Okay. I think we're rolling now. About freaking time. Sorry about that. Uh, First time I've connected to YouTube in a long time, and so things were a little bit technically difficult. We got it sorted. It's okay. Everything's good. Everything's good. Welcome. Thank you to the folks that have tuned in already and have checked in and made sure that I am indeed alive and live. I decided this year that I really need to redo my portfolio website and redo a bunch of the photo edits that I've done over the years to sort of just be updated. And honestly, if you know photo editing, you know that as soon as you're done with the photo, you jump back into the cycle of it's actually not done yet. Nothing's ever done yet. So hooray for non-destructive editing. Hooray for being able to reset things and try them again and all that jazz. Makes life a lot more fun, makes this a lot more interesting. So as I've sort of matured over the years in how I shoot and how I like to edit and what I like photographically, well, we've ended up where we are today. So let's jump right in. I have not spent a ton of time prepping for this. I went ahead and grabbed about, 35 images that I've wanted to re-edit or have never edited before. A variety of different stuff from astro to landscapes and some just sort of cool pictures. Some travel stuff from Glacier National Park. Here's Thor's Well. Here's some stuff from up in the Olympic Peninsula, the Oregon coast. This is Crater Lake. I don't think I'm going to touch this one today. Bunch of stuff from the coast. Here's some stuff from Iceland. Here's some random stuff up near Mount Hood. So there's a bunch of good stuff in here that I'm really excited to get into. I don't really know where to begin. Probably just start with a photo. My goal for these, I think, is good because these take a little while to go fully all the way through Lightroom and Photoshop. So for this first one, I'm really just feeling things out, seeing how it feels to be kind of on camera and doing editing. Talking through, I've never really sat down and talked through my whole process from start to finish. My goal for these streams is going to be to do 3 to 5 photos minimum, from raw all the way to kind of a finished product. And then they will get cataloged into my portfolio, and over time we will end up with a fully revamped portfolio. Yeah, this is kind of just an accountability tool to finally get some stuff done and feel like I'm being kind of social and get sort of a parasocial gaming fix at the same time. So please feel free to comment or ask questions or whatever you need to do. I will try to tune in to the chat here and make sure that I am answering questions and engaging and all that sort of stuff, but I'm also not a professional, so we're going to learn together. I'm going to learn, you're going to learn. It's a bunch of good stuff. Feel free to drop feedback if something's too loud or not loud enough. This microphone is really doing its best chugging along, so until I can upgrade that, you may have to bear with turning the volume up much louder in order to hear me, but I'm excited to jump into things. So let's get started, and I think I want to do something fun to start, so let's jump into some astrophotography to start. And if I'm talking through my process from start to finish, the first thing I do when I'm looking at a photo is kind of just assessing a bunch of different stuff. We're looking at kind of like the angle, the tilt, the overall composition, how difficult it's going to be to edit if you get in really close, like how noisy is it. This one's actually not so bad compared to like the Crater Lake one that I mentioned a minute ago. This one, the exposure is already cranked, and you can see the noise in this is just ridiculous. And so that's going to be a really challenging one to edit. That's why I'm not sure if I'm not going to get into that one today. But we can start right here. So when I'm looking at this, I'm very happy with past Aaron. 2015 Aaron got the focus right, which is honestly the hardest thing to do with astrophotography. Getting it just right is tough, and so this is a pretty dang good overall composition for me 10 years ago being fairly inexperienced. So I jump into the develop thing. There's a lot of typically I'm not following any sort of like must do this, must do that, first, second, third, or fourth. The things that I look for initially are really just let's enable some profile corrections. That's going to make some major changes right away and flatten the image a little bit, which is typically a good thing. You don't want to have too much lens distortion. You can look at like sharpening. Sharpening you can crank all the way up towards like 70, and it's going to be a good thing overall. So you can see when we sharpen, you're getting quite a bit more star detail as you get up towards the high 60s. So we're going to leave it around a 68. That's kind of my go-to. And then from there, we jump back up to the top. And a lot of these, so as shot, this was actually pretty dang dark right around here. Can't see much. And with Astro, the nice thing is you can go about to 3 exposure stops before, I mean, if you shoot them properly, before you start getting crazy noise. And that's obviously grain of salt. I like to think that if I'm shooting well, I'm going to end up with an image that can be taken up 3 stops and be okay. So that's kind of my, and you can see even up here in the corners, we start getting some extra noise and some discoloration. So this might even be a little high. But we start getting that around 2. So let's just bump it up. Let's stick it at 2.9. And all of this stuff is going to get tweaked as we go through, but you got to start somewhere, right? So we're going to start with exposure. The next thing I'm going to look at is the crop and the angle. So if I am dealing with this image, there's a few different ways that you can get like a perfectly straight line. This lake isn't perfectly straight, and actually if we jump out of the crop, you can see that there's the horizon line and then there's a reflection line on the water, and that horizon actually is pretty straight, but because of the reflection line it's looking a little tilted to the right. And so what I'm going to do here is just ever so slightly for my own purposes push that a little to the left, just barely. Oh, and there we go, we lost the camera. That's okay, we can get it back. We can bring it back. Right, camera? You can do this? You know what you're doing? Come on, baby cakes. Give me 2 seconds. Oh, okay. Technical difficulties will be the end of me. Okay, so we're liking this as far as the crop goes, or the angle of the image. This is looking pretty good. I'm going to worry about kind of final crop dimensions and sort of stuff later. We're going to sit with this for the time being so that we get as much of the image in as possible, and then we can sort of crop down once we have more of a finalized styling. When I'm looking at this, I really like the star reflections here. I wish the Milky Way was more crisp, but we were a little early for it, to be honest. So we're going to see what we can pull out detail-wise. Otherwise, I just really like the colors and the overall composition. And so we're just going to start playing with some stuff. Contrast is typically a good thing to bump in there. It's going to give you a little bit more pop between the stars and the darker sky behind them. May also make your foreground stuff pop out a little bit more, which is nice. You add a little bit of dimensionality back to the image without rounding it in the way that like lens distortion would. And then we're going to start playing with some stuff. And a lot of this is just sort of like what do you like? What looks good to you? So I'll just sort of move some of these sliders around. Highlights we're going to bring up slightly. Shadows we're probably also going to bring up slightly, but not enough to like, because you see if you crank those, you start getting this crazy stuff down here. And while I would like to get some of the tree detail, and we can bring some of the tree detail back in and then fix the foreground with masking later on, we don't want to overdo it. So I'm going to look at like right around in the 20s, bring up some of the shadows. Nothing too crazy. Whites are going to really hit your stars. That's how you can get these like crazy, you know, we could blow this out if we wanted to. We could mute them a little bit more if we wanted to, like if something in the sky was really impressive, northern lights, that sort of a thing. But as it stands, I think we're just going to bring that up slightly. And blacks, honestly, we could come up slightly, very, very slightly, just a touch up right there. Another thing with the sky, the stars, your white balancing, your temp and your tint are going to be hugely dramatized. Like they're going to be much more dramatic than in kind of daylight images. So you can see, you can get a ton of play in the sky and the stars in that, I think that was the moon that was setting. So I'm going to look for something that just looks pleasing to my eye. I like to go a little colder, mostly because it looks a little bit more natural when the sky is more of like a bluish green or even just a blue. I'm not crazy about this though. I do like having I liked having a little bit more warmth in this image. So I'm gonna bring this down ever so slightly, but not anything crazy. Like here, I like that a lot. And then your tint is also going to play, you know, green to purple. So if you want like a really crazy purple sky, if you want it to be more green and look more like northern lights or something, you can do that. I don't want it to be too dramatic, and I want it to lean more green, I think. So honestly, we're gonna set it at like a +5, down from a +8. And you can see there's still some like pretty crazy noise going on here. So one of the things that you can do is play with your manual luminance or your denoise. I typically like to keep all of the info in the photo and do that as one of my last steps, and then do final tweaks after that. But I like to get my kind of colors where I want them to be and overall composition, and then I'll worry about denoising the whole thing. One of the steps that I skipped early, but could be one of the earlier steps, is also your clarity slider. This is going to be personal preference once again, but also kind of knowing your camera and your gear. For me, I know that my camera and lens typically do best right around like a +12 or a +14 on clarity. That's just slight edge sharpening on some of the more detailed objects. You can probably see that this tree's got a little bit clearer there. So that's just a personal preference one. One of my favorite ones recently has been this dehaze slider, and you can very easily overdo this and make it way too crunchy, or you know, if you go the other direction, you're going to get a really washed out image. But this tool, especially with daylight images, has been so powerful for it feels like it combines a few different things. It's like combining your highlight, shadows, and your contrast all at once, sort of a thing. And just it tweaks them. It's like nice tweaks. And so I'll typically do that between like a +5 to a +20, depending on the image and the time of day that it was shot. After that, we look at vibrance and saturation. If this were a daylight photo, I would typically go saturation up about 12, or vibrance up about 12, saturation down about 5. That's kind of my sweet spot. For something like this, it really depends on what you want out of the sky. You can see that you can get really, really bright, vibrant color differences as you go up and down. And honestly, sometimes this looks amazing. Sometimes it really looks overdone. Like you can overcook the image really easily doing this. So I'm gonna sit in that sort of 14. And then saturation, these things just behave very differently in star images versus images that are shot during the day. So you kind of have to learn both if you want to do both. And with star images, you can get away with boosting both without it looking too overcooked, as long as you are gentle with these. You don't want to be going too crazy on the cranking. And I think, honestly, if I had to describe how my editing style and just sort of preferences over the last 10 years have changed, it's a lot of these two sliders. I started out, I think, as most photographers do early on, you start out and you crank those to fucking oblivion. And then as I got a little bit more, I can actually bring this up. I'll bring this up so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So you start out early on, and we'll just keep scrolling. We'll keep scrolling. Spend a lot of time on Instagram. You start out and you're just like blowing those out of the water. All you want to do is saturate everything on your screen. Looks so good. Why wouldn't you? And then I think circa, 2014, 2015, I started going the other direction. And it was like, I want everything to look muted and uniform. So you can see, well, I guess this was 2015. So probably 2016, 2017 is when I started going more muted. So a lot of these are like really saturated, really bright reds and stuff like that, not really thinking about the whole thing as a composition. And then when you get up into more like 2016, 2017, this is where I kind of had my first, like, I'm going to change how I edit things. And this is when you get the moodier, lifted shadows, lifted blacks, a little bit of a faded look to it, not as much saturation in the images, really kind of going for that, like, overall aesthetic that you can be consistent with in every image. And I think for some photographers that works. I find that I shoot a lot of different stuff, though, and this looks great when you shoot a lot of the same stuff, but when you shoot a lot of different stuff, honestly, I like having a little bit of pop of color, and I like having kind of a color to center on and work around. And so as I got a little bit more, here we go. So this is all like this deeper blue and green and very like German Romers-y. But as I've gotten older and as I've really enjoyed, having a little bit more variance in my style, that's changed quite a bit. And I've gotten a lot more rich color, but not oversaturated as much as possible. So there's some examples there. So for this one, I do want to have a really healthy contrast between this bright orange, warm color, and then kind of the cooler green-blue of the sky and this variation between them. So we're going to try to sort of center this image edit around that concept of really bright pop of orange and then a cool overall image, though. So now we jump into curves, and curves are probably my favorite module within the entire Lightroom thing. When it comes to how you can impact the overall image, I think that curves are just the freaking best. They're the freaking best. And the same sort of concept for daylight and astro images is pretty consistent, at least in my opinion. You're sort of looking for a bit of an S-curve, very, very slight, and then you can sort of tweak within that accordingly. And so a lot of times I'm just sitting here kind of shifting up and down, seeing what different parts of the image are doing. You can see if I bring highlights up, that orange pop gets much more vibrant, and if I bring it down, then it's going to be a little bit more muted. And so depending on what I'm able to do with this grainy, grayish, purplish area between, these may be tweaked later on. And a lot of this is going to be like scrolling up, making a tweak, scrolling down, making a tweak, especially when we get into HSL. That's where things get real interesting. So at least to start, I'm just going to apply kind of a general slight S curve. I'm going to bring blacks up just slightly. I'm going to bring highlights down just slightly, which will make it so it's impossible to really clip the image on either side. And I honestly, I sit on tone curve. I really don't mess with like red, green, blue often. There'll be some times where I do, but it's definitely not every image. It's not even close. Like maybe 10% of the images I'll touch RGB curves. But most of my color work I'll do within the color mixer module. And I used to sit here and kind of click through these ones until I realized that with all, it just makes everything so much easier. You can sit in orange and not just play with the hue, but also the saturation without having to bounce back and forth and lose your spot. And so I really like being able to edit in this capacity with everything in front of me as much as possible. And so hue, we're looking at this orange because that's my pop of color. I don't want to turn it yellow. That makes the sky do some crazy weird stuff around here. It kind of looks cool, but it also just is a little bit distracting. And color in Astro is really tough because you don't necessarily see it at first, but there's like 4 different colors within here. You've got some red, you've got some purple, you've got some blue, you've got some green, and then stars are going to be all these different colors as well. And so you have to kind of be patient with this and make sure that the tweaks that you're making are pretty slight, at least at first. A lot of this difference between these patches that are different colors, those will be smoothed out when you do get to luminance and you start messing with the like I love the manual or the automatic denoise stuff. Don't love that it creates a new DNG, but you know, whatever. We'll work with it. So I'm gonna play with like each color individually because we're gonna have so many different colors within this image. I'm gonna play. It looks like red isn't that effective. Obviously, orange is gonna make some major changes here, and I kind of like it going a little bit more red. So we're gonna buff that down 10, and then we're gonna play with yellow here to bring that. It looks like this patch, this kind of grayish patch around the stars is really reading as yellow within the camera, which gives us a little bit more control here, and I like that. I don't necessarily want to make it super orange, but I do like leaning it towards orange. So you can see this band above the trees, that's reading very green. If we go in here, that's like that whole section is reading as green. And we want it to read more green because otherwise it's this kind of grayish, yellowish color. So I'm going to bring green up slightly. Aqua is typically where your stars are going to be, and you can see the sky shifting pretty considerably here. So it looks like the background behind the stars is really, really aqua, which is good. Aqua is a great color to work with, both with water and with sky. So I don't mind that very much. I'm just going to try to blend that a little bit more with the blues so that it looks a little more cool. And then you can see the blues, this whole top half of the image is really reading as blue. And you're getting some of like a lot of the bigger stars up here are reading very blue. So they can shift between kind of this aqua all the way to a purple. I like to have my stars kind of as white as possible. And so I'm going to play with that to get more of a neutral. And honestly, it might just be leaving it at 0. That might be the best thing that we can do here is have them read more white. We'll get into purple. Purple is where your chromatic aberration is going to sit. And honestly, if we go down, back down to where we enabled the profile collections, we can remove the chromatic aberration, and that'll do a decent job. And then we can sort of get the rest of it tweaked with purple here. And that doesn't honestly look like it's doing much. A lot of these you're going to want to just leave at 0 because otherwise you end up with more of this sort of like difference between patches in the sky. It becomes a lot more obvious when you play with these. So these are sort of at your own discretion here. You don't want the image to come out looking super fake or over cooked. So you do need to be careful here, but I don't mind a little bit of cooking, you know? Let them cook a little bit. So we're going to repeat the process now with saturation and luminance. Saturation isn't honestly as impactful as luminance, in my opinion. You do have some, yeah, just a little, as a treat. So greens, once again, it's that band right above the trees, and we can sort of play with this until it blends really nicely. And honestly, that's going to be kind of a tweak down on this image. Aqua, you can make the sky really gross. You can make it really gray, which also isn't super appealing. So we're going to find kind of a muted middle ground there. And blue, you can really see where those stars are. You don't want to make them like white because then you lose a lot of interest in the sky. But you also don't want to overcook those ones. So I think I'm going to bring that one down a little bit too, just slightly. And then we may play with global saturation more. Once we know that these aren't conflicting, we're not getting any crazy banding. Like if I were to bring green way up, you can see this like gross splotchy band across the sky. We're going to bring that down. Global to 100. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. Excuse me. I'm not going to do that. I don't like it splotchy. Same thing with purples. Purples aren't looking too impactful here, too punchy, so we're going to leave those alone. Magentas aren't changing the image much if you go 0 to 100, so we're going to leave those alone. And then we get into my favorite section here, which is the luminance. And this one will really, really make things pop. So I like bringing orange up here a little bit, make that extra poppy, but once again, we're making sure that this splotchiness doesn't happen. That tearing that kind of happens between pixels. I'm going to sort of blend the luminance levels together here as much as possible, so that we don't get too much of that. Yellow is going to be another big one. You can see that whole section. You can kind of make it look like there's like some fog with the setting sun behind it. Or you can make it look gross, and I don't like that. I don't like looking like we're going to Mordor. So I think that's going to get blended into the orange really nicely, right around like a 15. That's going to look the best. Green. Green can make some things glow or look very Northern Lightsy. I don't want to do too much of that, but I do want to keep the luminance levels consistent. That's going to be like a low 20s, I think. Aqua, same thing. You want to, it's kind of like you're blending each color into the next. So if there was a lot more red in here at the core, you would blend that into the orange and so forth. And that's why it's nice to have one color that you sort of start with. And in this case, it's this orange. In other cases, you may be starting with like a yellow or a green. And then you sort of use that as your baseline to balance all of the other colors around for consistency. And then blue is interesting because a lot of times your stars are going to read more blue than other things. And so you can see how big of a difference it makes to, it almost looks like there's more stars in the sky if you bump that luminance up. And so I'm going to tweak that up, probably low 50s, so that we don't get too much, it's going to look like you crank the clarity slider if you go too far. But that's a nice, it makes the stars pop a little more. It makes the ones in the water pop a little bit more. It just looks good. Purple's not going to be super impactful. I think we're going to leave that. We might bump it a little bit just in case any of these stars that are trending more purple need to have a little bit of pop. Magenta, we can just leave it alone. If we had done the white balance more purple, this would obviously be a lot more impactful, but since it's sitting more green, we're going to be playing with greens and blues more than anything else. Let's see. So from here, honestly, my next step would probably be sit for a second, look at what the image is doing, and then start playing with masks. And rather than selecting the sky here or doing like what is it, vignette, when you're doing like a global sort of circular masking. I really love playing with linear and radial gradients. And the reason being that you can sort of feather them out and they're a little bit more custom than just slapping on a vignette. We want a similar effect to the vignette. I like having kind of a dark start and then it gets brighter and that feels like you're kind of walking into the image. But we may want that effect to be not as punchy as the one that we're doing on the top. So rather than doing a global vignette, I'm going to pop in a couple of these linear gradients. So the first one I'm going to do is starting from the bottom and going up. And I hate the red overlay, so we're going to get rid of that. And this is a good way to get rid of those. Look at all that noise in the bottom. So we can kind of black that out. Just to the point where we're not getting any of that gross stuff in the corners anymore. We can play with contrast. It's not super important here. Highlights we can bring up a little bit. Shadows we can kind of play with until we're not getting as much nasty corner stuff. But once again, we could plop a little bit of a vignette on here and it would look okay. Or we could bring blacks up and shadows down. That's one of my favorite tricks, to kind of soften your blacks on the edges. So something like this, where to the eye, you're not necessarily going to see that. And another fun trick you can do with these is you can change the color temperature. So we can make this very obviously water underneath. If we go more blue, we can make it reflect more of the orange if we go more orange. I'm liking the effect, honestly, a little bit more blue, I think. And you'll see that I'll frequently grab a slider and then just go back and forth between -100 and 100, and that's just to see like what are the ends of my spectrum here, what's absolute max and minimum of whatever it is that I'm sliding around, and then I'll settle somewhere kind of comfortably that feels and looks nice to me. Another fun one here you can do is play with the saturation quite a bit. And I typically, because these stars in the bottom are looking more blue than the ones up here, I'm going to desaturate that slightly. Same thing with tint. We can sort of play with tint to make the sky reflect more green, or if we wanted it to be more purple for some reason. If the sky was more purple, that would make more sense, but we're going to tint this a little bit more green, I think. And what I want to do now is look at this. I think that's going to blend okay with the luminance stuff that we do later, but this is something that we may come back to, this mask specifically, to tweak some things. Then what I'm going to do is add another linear gradient. I'm going to come down from the top, and I'm going to layer the ends of them over each other, and they're going to kind of probably help cancel each other out a little bit, which is nice. And this side, I'm going to bring the exposure down slightly so that we get that sort of vignette effect, but not as powerful as on the bottom, because we still do want to have some detail here in the sky. And then we just start playing with the same sliders that we did for the rest of the image. We now get to kind of play with pieces of this independently, which is really fun. That's one of my favorite parts, is getting to, you almost get to edit like 5 images within one image if you're playing with your gradients. And honestly, I could rotate this slightly. Because of the light coming in from the left, we may want this to appear more like we've got a little bit of left to right light play here, which I'm going to tweak that slightly and then keep playing with this. So we can bring highlights up. Maybe we bring shadows down in the sky, which is another trick to make your stars pop a little bit more against that background. We can bring whites up if we want more star light. And we really just want to be able to see, let's see, blacks. Blacks we don't want to lift too much. We probably want to go negative slightly on those. Okay. That's looking pretty cool. And one of the cool things you can do with these masks is also you can click to kind of turn them on and off so you can see what they look like with or without. So I think that's a noticeable improvement. Play with some temp control, and this is a cool way to get like gradient within your sky. If I'm playing this slightly down, it's going to be more blue in this corner and more green down bottom left, which is a little bit of the gradient that I'm looking for in this image. I like having some play in the color in the sky. I think it just adds interest, and can kind of help you also balance out if you still have some crazy color going on in your stars, depending on how you can like negate it, right? Like if it's really blue here, you can go more yellow, and that's gonna kind of even it out at more of a flat gray. So there's a bunch of different tricks you can employ to make your sky come out a little bit more interesting than where it started. I don't think I need to mess much with curves here. We could see how it looks playing with some of them. Honestly, bringing that down actually isn't so bad. And if we set a midpoint here for... Okay, interesting. So if we curve this up a little bit, so once again, we're just adding another S-curve layered on top of our S-curve to get a little bit more contrast in the sky. And I like that a lot. That looks good. I don't really worry about those just because layering texture, clarity, sharpness over already done sharpness for the image can get messy pretty quickly. But that's where I would sit some of these masks. And I may play with another one just for funsies where you're coming this way. And this is going to really intensify that lighting coming from the orange there. So we could do something like this where we have like light coming in from the left, really blow that out. And honestly, that looks pretty cool. Or you can do, you can diminish the light if you want to bring the contrast up. That'll make the lit up area look a little less so. And I'm going to kind of tweak these a little bit here. So like highlights, we could really make that orange pop. We could make the orange less pop if we wanted to highlight the sky a little bit more, but I think that's the most interesting part of this image, so I'm going to make it pop a little bit more. I'm going to bring shadows down slightly. Whites, we don't want to get too overblown here because you end up getting a lot more grain over here that you have to fix later, so we're going to be careful with these. And I don't like doing too much of the black because then we start getting issues in here. So this is another one where like a radial gradient we could fit here and then feather it all the way out, and that would actually, why don't we do that? I think that might be better than doing this side gradient here. How do I delete you? Delete mask 3. There we go. So let's try a radial gradient just for educational purposes. So we can draw this radial gradient out, and then so the inner part is where the like effects are going to take place fully, and then the outer ring is how far it gets feathered out. And so what I like to do here is place this inner ring kind of on the brightest point of the light that's coming in. And then I may do this radial gradient is then going to kind of expand out from there, and that's going to feather it out. So this is sort of what we're looking for here, and you can really make just that spot pop or make it go darker, whatever you want to do. I like bringing that up a little bit, and it works very similarly to that linear gradient. You just kind of have to know how to set it up. And so that's, it's a lot of tweaking. Like now you can see, so these are the edits that I've got. If I were to expand this out, then everything within that circle is going to get hit 100%, versus if I do this, it's going to slightly be a little bit less intense. And same with this. So if we were to come in versus out, you're going to have different changes going on. Shadows. Honestly, the shadow detail gets really nice when you pop this out. There's enough light there that there is detail in the shadows, so I do want to kind of highlight that and these trees. And I like now how like the trees over here are black, and these are more of like a warm black coming off of the orange. So I like having a little bit of gradient there as well. It adds depth to the image. You can then see that these aren't just tiny trees and these are big trees. There's a curve where these trees are closer to you on the right, and then as they get closer to the center, they're further out. So that adds a little bit of depth within the shadows subconsciously that I really like. And we can further mess with that with playing with our blacks here. Like you can see if I bring that way up, you can tell that those are much closer to the light source. So I think that's looking pretty good. Let's see what this looks like on and off. So I'll come down here and toggle these. So that's all the masks off. That's where we were just from editing with the kind of raw sliders, and then with masks on, you can see that that adds a little bit more pop here. And when I'm doing that, I can see that the lower gradient that I did, I actually like that a little less intense here. So I'm going to jump back into my lower gradient, and I may bring this down slightly. I don't necessarily need it going all the way up. And that's going to keep more detail here where the stars and the reflection on the water are happening. So that looks good. Try not to overcook it. If it were just me sitting here, I would probably overcook it. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll edit an image and I'll walk away for 20 minutes and I'll come back and I'll just be like, what were you thinking? This is hideous. Obviously don't have the luxury of that this time, and sometimes it's better to just get something done than to obsess over the details. So that's what we're working on in these. We are working on keeping things concise and accomplishing things. That's my goal, right? Gotta actually do stuff. Color grading is, I think, an overlooked module that not a lot of people play with. And if I'm being honest, I didn't either for a very long time. Probably just within the past 5 or so years have I really started messing with these. It's like your tints and your shadows and your highlights and your midtones. It can look intimidating, but it's really not. All you're doing is selecting an image or selecting a color within that sort of light, I don't even know, bracket, and then you're playing with the intensity of that highlight and all sorts of different stuff. And this is a really cool place where you can either negate or accentuate colors that are already happening in this image. So if, like, say for instance in highlights, if I was like, I wish this orange wasn't so orange, what I could do is go in and add the opposite color into it, like a blue or even like a purple. And that'll help change the color of those highlights. It's global across the whole image. I think that you can do this within the gradients, but I don't often play with it just in a gradient because a lot of times that'll make your image look extremely photoshopped. But typically what I'll do, and this is a lot more impactful, I think, in daylight images rather than nighttime, but I'll just sort of circle around this and see like what looks cool. What's a cool color combo that I could be doing in my highlights here? You know, what gives it a little bit more separation from the sky? What makes it really pop? We could lean more into the orange. We could go away from the orange. And I think to help blend this into the greens, what I may want to do is just do a slight blue and sort of counter it a little bit here. And so this is going to be like a low saturation, middle between blue and aqua. We're looking at like a saturation of like, I don't know, maybe like 17. And then this down here is the lux of those, which I honestly don't really understand. It's sort of like, it's just how bright are those tones within the image. So really close up, it's very obvious. You get further away, and yes, it's sort of the intensity of those tones, but it's not as obvious. So this one, you don't want to go too extreme. I might make it a little brighter just so that that pops even more, and that's looking really nice. Into midtones, this is going to play with your sky significantly. And this is where you can get those really crazy gradients even more pronounced. It looks pretty cool right around here, but that might be losing too much of the green. And obviously we don't want to go too crazy with it. So let's see, how do I reset this? Yeah, you can double click it to reset it. So I'm just going to circle around this a little bit until I find a color combination that I think is really pretty. And I think we're going to be somewhere in this purple range here. But not quite too purple because we don't want to lose the green. So that's where we get into the saturation of it, sliding this along the line once you've sort of selected your hue. I don't want it to turn the sky not green, but I do want to soften that into more of a blue. So we're going to sit like right here. That's pretty cool. And then shadows. This is where in your daylight images, this is going to make the biggest difference, and things can get real ugly real fast. In the nighttime ones, it's going to change the color of your sky and your shadows, so it's also going to make it the biggest difference out of any of them. This can make stuff in daylight look really cool, really like vintage. This is how you get more of like a film look to digital images. A lot of times you're throwing red or orange in your shadows, sometimes green. Really depends on the image. And here, I'm not really sure what I want to do. Let's get back into the freeform. Like, it looks cool when you cool the image down. It also looks really cool warm. So where do we want to be? I kind of like somewhere in here, and then really low intensity, like just a twinge of that blue is going to go a really long way in the shadows. So I think like a 6. And then you're going to see dramatic differences when you toggle these on and off in terms of, like, you can see how much warmer and greener it is without it. And then this sort of softens that green into more of a blue, and it turns the orange into this cool gradient of orange to purple and then into the green. So it's wrapping the whole color wheel, which I think is a cool tool to be able to use. Room temp. Yeah, we'll go room temp with all the images. Your blending and your balance is just like taking that intensity up or down slightly. I like bringing it down in this situation just to make it a little less pronounced. And your balance is like, it's also going to do some crazy stuff. So you're going to use your personal discretion. I'm going to leave that one alone in this image just to make sure that we don't get too unnatural looking. So we get down into some of our final Lightroom modules here. You can do manual noise reduction. You can do automatic noise reduction. If you go in manually, you can see that this is just going to blend a lot of those a lot better, but you're also going to lose some of the overall stars. So no luminance, and then you bring some of that luminance out noise reduction wise, and you're going to lose the number of stars, but it's going to make the ones that are still there look better. Honestly, I don't mind that here just because we don't have a crazy Milky Way, and it's going to really help with the noise in the bottom. But we can also do a denoise block here, which is going to create a new DNG after we get a chance to see kind of a preview of what it's going to look like. And I want to see in the, how are my stars in the, like if I do this at a 40 versus a 50, what are my stars looking like up here? That's actually not bad. That looks pretty dang good. You can see you lose a lot of that purple green mess that's happening in the deep shadows between the stars, and it's just going to turn them more of a consistent blue. And in here, same thing. That's going to help really blend those together. So let's do it. Let's go ahead and enhance. Enhance. Jarvis, enhance. And that's just another one of the more powerful. That didn't exist when I learned Lightroom. And now I use that so frequently because it's just so good. See, we didn't lose as much star detail doing the automatic noise reduction. Whereas in this, even tweaking detail and contrast, you're going to have a really hard time getting it as clean as it does automatically. And that has also fixed a lot of our issues in the bottom. So now that we've done this, I want to revisit the masks real quick and just see, like, if I bring this down so that we don't lose as much of the light here, and we can bring this, yeah, we don't even have to bring this down as much to get kind of a black edge that then fades. That's nice. And we may even be able to bring shadows up a little bit more. No, not too much. We got to be careful with that. We're going to leave that alone. We're going to leave that alone. We learned our lesson. So this is the image that we're working with at the end of our Lightroom stuff. You can also do some stuff with skewing and transforming. I prefer to do that in Photoshop personally. So when I get to this point, and actually, let's see, 4105, it actually looks pretty sweet when you warm it up a little bit more than that. 4255. Yeah, that's very cool. So this is looking pretty good. At this point, what I'd probably do is go back into the library setting for it. This is our DNG file. I'm going to go ahead and star this at like a 4 because it's done in Lightroom, but it's not done, right? That's what we're waiting for here is, oh, my Apple Watch battery is low. Well, we're going to charge it then. So this is looking good, but it's definitely not done. And at this point in the series, what I'm going to do is right-click it and go edit in Photoshop. And this is going to bring up Photoshop. It's going to plop the image right in. The cool thing about these two programs is they talk to each other. So as you make edits and then save them within Photoshop, that's going to apply in the Lightroom library. I can unstack this so you can see the non-DNG version versus the DNG version. You can see how much that luminance change really made there. But now we've got this open in Photoshop. This is where a lot of the magic happens. And to start, the very first thing that I do is make a new layer from the background. And I'm going to call this skewed. Did not mean to do that. I want to duplicate this layer and call it skewed. And that is because I'm going to skew it. This is something that I learned from doing architectural photography. This is how you get your verticals all nice and lined up straight. So you can see when you scroll in here, some of these trees are leaning a little bit in. Some of that was fixed by the lens distortion that we fixed within Lightroom, but also some of it is not getting fixed. And the reason that we duplicate rather than just working on the background layer is so if we did need to come in here, you can see that we still have sky behind it. This is particularly important in architectural ones. A lot of times you are duplicating layers multiple times, and then as you are like punching through or putting an adjustment layer on one and then masking it out in a duplicated layer, that's really important. Here, not so much. Most of my skewing is just going to be these slight tweaks out to the side to make sure that those trees are looking more vertical. Just barely tweaked out, just barely tweaked out. And we're going to leave the bottom alone a little bit. And then one of the important things that people don't realize too is that after you skew wider, you also have to go up. Otherwise, your image is going to look shorter than it did initially. And it's very minor adjustments, but that is an important part of making sure that your images don't look really, really like tall things don't look bent in towards the center, especially when you're shooting wide angle like this. So from here, With stars, it really depends on what you want to do with individual elements. Like in this one, I may come in and say, like, I really like this star right here, right? So what I might do in this instance is come in and clone stamp this. I might steal that star and I might put another one there. And I might put another one here. And I might put this guy here. And this is how you can get a lot more, obviously, stars in the image. But also, like, I'm not in love with this tree branch being so egregiously horizontal. So what I might do in this instance is go in and clone stamp some of the sky, and we're just going to paint this out a little bit. And that way, when we're looking back at this and we're seeing the silhouettes of these trees, they're a little bit more separated out. I could even, like, this one's a dead snag up here. I may want to make that a little less prominent by painting out some of the edges of it here so that it's not taking up as much space in the sky. It's not overlapping with another tree. You can see I'm cleaning up that branch there so that you don't get the dead branch just kind of hanging there. Same thing with these. I'm going to clean up some of those branches so that they look a little bit better. And same with these guys here. These are looking real crazy. It looks like my hair in the morning. Nobody wants to see that. Like a fucking hedgehog. And you want to make sure that you're pulling from areas in the sky that are very close, because we have quite a bit of variance in the sky in terms of colors. It's very easy to get like a smudgy sort of look here, especially when you've got, this is a very muddled area with a lot of like purple, green, red all mixed in. So you don't want to get too crazy with this. You really want to keep things tight and close to where they live in the image color wise. Otherwise, it'll be very obvious that you have done this retouching. And what the heck is going on with this tree? Why do we look like that? Do better. Be better. So that's some example of cleanup that I would do on something like this, just to make sure that you can get rid of crazy branches or I don't know, random stuff. Same thing with like your noise in the corners. That's a good way to get rid of that. So what I'll do down here, let's just say that this was still really noisy. You can pull your true black and you can really paint that out down here. But where this comes in real handy is with something like this, where we want like, let's get like a 30. And I'm going to clone stamp this guy here, and then you can add more of those in. You can add more of these little reflecty boys in here, which is always fun. Love a good reflecty boy. And this is just how you can make some things look a little bit more dramatic. So you can see here what I because the water is lighter than black up here, when I painted that in, it came with a little bit of that water. So then you're going to want to go grab some of this water that's black around the edges and just make sure that that is looking realistic and you don't have green splotches all around your stars that you're painting in. And then as you can like turn this off to see what sort of, because we're doing non-destructive editing, and this is the background and then this is the skewed layer. And honestly, what I should be doing here is then duplicating this, and we're going to go clone stamps, or even just, I mean, you can name it whatever you want. It can be edits, it can be fixes, stars, whatever you want. So this is how we're going to end up with, like, I mean, depending on the intensity of the edit, it could be 3 layers, it could be 20, depending on how many things you need to go in and play with. But I'm going to go ahead and go in and grab some of these stars, paint a few more of these in here because I think they look cool. And I love things that look cool. We're going to make sure that they don't look fake, though. So we want to grab some sky or some water here that isn't the same color. And that's just going to make things look a little bit cleaner. So once again, water. This is a pretty tedious process, but it pays off so much in the end when you really, when you see the final image and just how much more like glittery and interesting and just beautiful it all looks. Totally worth it. And we can even bring this down since we're working with a much skinnier, these stars are really skinny down here. I want to put one of these here, and maybe I want to put this one, have that reflect like here between the trees. Then we go in and fix this. There we go. And if it were me, and it is me, but if you guys weren't sitting here with me, I would go in and paint in a metric buttload of these because they're just so cool. I am a slut for star reflections on water, and I'm not afraid to admit it. Let's get a bunch of these in here. We can do this, we can do a bunch of these at once, and then we'll go in and figure out the water around it. Oh, that one needs to get fixed right now, because if I forget that, that's going to look terrible. Chicka chicka, yeah. Let's get some of these orange ones and bring them down here too. And grab the water and fix around it. See how good that looks? Look at how good that looks. And we can do the same thing up top too. So let's take this and let's paint in an additional star up here. Let's do this, paint in one here, grab you, make another bright one, grab you, make another bright one. And we can even add some of these in where there aren't bright stars, just to get a little bit more differentiation between. Just clean up some of that blue edge. Because I like having, I don't like that there's only big stars over in this left corner initially. I want to take some of these and paint them in over here as well, just for extra pops. So something like that, but we need to clean it. And these are just the little details that are going to go a long way in the overall composition. You can see without, with, we just added in some more dots, which is cool. And then finally, once I've done my clone stamps, my punching through, my crazy edits like that, what I'm going to do here is duplicate this one last time, and this is going to be my high pass. And we're going to come up to filter, we're going to go into other, we're going to go into high pass. And this one, you want to have it outline the things that you want more, I don't really know, just to pop a little bit more. It really is just pop. This is like the pop filter, to be honest. So we're gonna go high pass, we're gonna get this pop on here, and we're gonna change the blend style to overlay, and we're gonna change the opacity down to like 30%, just as a start. And it's very subtle, and you want it to be. You don't want it to be like, oh wow, that's blown out. And you can see that if I'm doing this at 100%, it's going to be way more obvious, right? That's going to really make the stars pop out. But if we're just doing it a little bit here, maybe even like 40%, it really doesn't look that bad at 100, to be honest. This isn't a great example of an image with high pass that can get cooked, but it's looking pretty good. Yeah. yeah, it just gives a little bit extra pop to things. And it'll be a lot more obvious what we did when we go ahead and save this. So we're going to save the image. It's going to take a second because it's also got to talk to Lightroom. And then when we jump back into Lightroom, we've got 3 versions here. So this is the one that we edited and did the manual luminance. This is the automatic luminance. And you can see that it blends the colors a little bit better when you're doing the adjustment. And then the skewed and photoshopped and all that sort of stuff one is looking here. And actually, why does it look? Okay, it wasn't looking as sharp when I was doing this a second ago, but now it's looking good. So this one, I'm gonna mark as 5 stars. And I might come back into here and do like 3 on this one. So this is our stack. The one that we ended up with is this 5-star one. And if you unstack this and go into here and you look at like the X and Y of, that's right, gotta go into develop first. And you go into the before and after. There you go. That's a pretty significant change between those two. And you can compare a bunch of different stuff, but that's going to be a finished one right there. So look at that. We knocked out one of our images first thing. I want to pick a daylight image. I want to pick a daylight image that I've been meaning to re-edit, and I think that might be this one. That's going to be a really good example of a lot of these things that I'm talking about when it comes to stuff. I could also do this one. Got a lot of options here. Let's restack this so it's less confusing. Let's do this one. No, not this one. This one with the people. This is one of my favorite pictures that I've taken. And it looks good coming out of camera. This is, I don't think any, yeah, this is totally untouched raw. The previous one, obviously, I had buffed up the exposure prior to it, mostly just so I could see what I was working with. This one, we are starting completely from scratch. And I just love the all the different oranges and greens and blues in this. You can really play with a bunch of different stuff to make this go crazy. Obviously, I shot this overexposed, which is kind of just a hot tip to take with you if you're shooting landscapes. You kind of do want to shoot overexposed because you can always go darker. And it's a lot harder to pull detail out of something that was shot a little too dark. I say that as somebody who's screwed up both ends of that spectrum. I think it's a little easier to pull from an overexposed image, and you can see that this was overexposed when I was shooting it. This was also, I don't know how long ago, 2016, so 8.5 years ago. So just a baby Aaron learning things on his camera, and still one of my favorite images to this day. So we're going to start out same spot we did last time. We're going to enable the profile corrections. If they look good, I think they look fine. That's fine. We're going to go into sharpening. We're going to bring that up to mid 60s, at least to start. Got some nice crispy lines going. And then we're going to start back up at the top and play with a few of these sliders. So if it's overexposed, I could go darker here, but we're going to lose a lot of that shadow detail. So I'm not going to touch exposure to start. It's actually a pretty dang good curve. I just know that we're clipped a little bit on these highlights, which means I'm going to bring the highlights down, but not too much because that cloud looks kind of crazy in the background. It almost looks fake. And so we want to just start to get tree detail here. Like this is overexposed. We want to bring that down to like maybe here and zoom back out and see what we're working with. And we can bring whites down. We can bring whites up. Once again, I don't want that cloud to do too much here. But again, in Photoshop, we can do a lot of stuff later. So let's maybe leave it right there for now. We're looking for a nice balanced image, no clipping, and we can also play with curves to slightly make sure that those clippings just don't happen. I like doing anywhere between a 0 and a 5 on this, and you're gonna keep the integrity of the image without completely losing details. So then we can actually bring highlights back up a little bit. Whites can come down a little bit. And we're working with a pretty flat, almost looks like a log video file coming out here, which is cool. So from here, I'm going to take a page out of architectural photography, and I think I'm going to bring shadows up to start, because we can always bring shadows darker in things like curves, but we want to have some of this rock detail and this depth that comes with it a little bit brighter in the foreground, and then we'll go darker in the background. And blacks we can bring down a little bit to help start bringing that depth in. Since we clipped things on the curves, we're not going to go underexposed or overexposed on anything, so you have a little bit more. I mean, you could really crush it if you wanted to, but I like sitting somewhere in here. And you don't want to overdo it, because we also have contrast we can play with, which is going to achieve a similar effect, but it's going to take your histogram and spread it from edge to edge, which you can do all at once, which is nice. And I'm constantly keeping an eye on my histogram here. You can also you can grab your histogram and shift it. I'm not a huge fan of that personally. I think it's a little imprecise, and I just like having a little bit more minute control. I'll also, like, you can grab exposure. You can also click on these and put in add a little goblin in the cave. I could do that. Just a little guy, just chilling. So, fun fact about this waterfall: people go out there and they walk out, and because there's this, like, it doesn't look like it's that deep. It isn't until you're about 10 feet from the waterfall, and then it drops off. A lot of people come out here and swim and, like, jump off and stuff into where it's deep. There's like hundreds of dead bodies floating in this, because the water will push them down and then under the lip, and they'll just sit here. So there's a lot of people that have, like, gotten drunk, jumped off the cliffs, gotten held under by the waterfall, not realizing that it's thousands of gallons of water falling on them, and they just get sort of, like, pushed up under this lip and they die there. So if you're ever at White River Falls, don't jump in. That's a quick way to not have a good time. So we're going to follow the similar rules that we did on the initial star image. I'm going to buff this up to 14. That's about where I like my clarity to sit with this camera and lens. Texture, don't really need to touch it. There's plenty of texture in the image. And then dehaze we can play with a little bit too, and that's going to add more of that crunch into our shadows and separate things out. I really don't understand the difference between dehaze and contrast, but they're very different. I could not tell you how, but they are. And now we're at a point where color is starting to be important. So we can either cool this down, we can warm it up. I actually really like this a little bit warmer, and then we'll bring blue back into it with saturation and some targeted color management. One of them dehazes and it's not the one you think. True. And then we'll play with vibrance. And this is where those yellows and greens really get more interesting. So a lot of times my kind of standard starting point is like 12 on vibrance and then a -5 on saturation. And we could even, honestly, this is another one where the saturation up doesn't look bad at all. We like that. We like that a lot. Curves, I'm going to want to brighten this a little bit, but make sure that these highlights don't get too blown out. I like that there's sort of a wispy, creamy feeling to the sky back here. We're also looking at this beam of light that's coming through the mist here. Don't want to lose that, but we don't want to make it so pronounced that it takes over and the rest of the image suffers. That's a trap that I've fallen into before, trying too hard to highlight something via editing where it ends up ruining the rest of the photo. So I'll basically put it where I want it to be and then scale it back like 10% or more, because I know that I'm hyper fixated on something. And a lot of times, like now, what time is it? 8:23. We've already been at this for an hour and a half, and my eyes are starting to do the weird thing. But we have to stay the course. So sometimes what I'll do in this situation is I'll change my background color, because one of the biggest things that you can lose in editing like this is kind of true white. You can see that this actually looks a little bit pink where it should be white. And so maybe we actually want to turn this down a little bit, or, otherwise mess with it. I can grab this white balance selector and I can put this on a cloud, and it's too white. So it's too white to be white apparently, but I can do something like this. Oh, it's not going to let me. Maybe here? Whoa, that's freaking... See, that once again, sometimes the automatic tools are fantastic. Sometimes they are just a little too aggro for my liking. So sometimes I'll change that to white, get reaccustomed to true white, and then go back to gray or leave it white. Depends on the day and how my eyes are feeling. Right now I'm feeling pretty good, but it's always nice to get a reference point on what is true white, and then you can kind of white balance around that. Sleepy Shark. Oh, this was taken at White River Falls in Oregon. I should probably just have maps up, huh? So we're going to go to Google. Can look at... Keep a glass of water. I'm beginning to understand your phobia of little goblin guys hanging out in caves. Yeah, it's terrifying. So this is the waterfall via Google Images. A lot of people that have taken other pictures. It's a cool spot. There's these like old abandoned. I have to think that they're like hydroelectric. Like this used to be a power generation point. But when you're looking at the map, this is out in bumfuck nowhere. So Mount Hood, you're east of Mount Hood. You go out to the Dalles and then you cut down this highway and you're just in the middle of freaking nowhere. It's it's a weird place. It's beautiful. It is in the middle of nowhere. You lose phone service like here. And you just don't, I don't know. It doesn't feel like you would be in such a cool place. But it's sort of just like a rest stop on the side of a tiny highway that not a lot of people know about, which is pretty cool. Yeah, and I think this was the only time that we've seen other people there. In fact, in this collection of images, I have another one, same spot, different day, and nobody was there. So you have it to yourself pretty often, which is cool. I just like this one because the lighting made the green really, really pop this day. And I'm a little bit of a... Yeah. Oh, no. The canyon place we went with Sean, that was Palouse Falls. They're very similar in a lot of ways, but Palouse, this is like, I mean, I said White River was a long drive. White River's like here. Palouse is up here, and Palouse is insane. Remember, Tyler, we were camping out in we hiked down to the bottom, and then you have to like use ropes to climb back up, and all sorts of crazy stuff. But this is Palouse. This is like a 200-foot waterfall versus the one we're editing here is maybe 30. I saw an old man fall down there. I did not help him. It was his time. Oh, man. I don't know if I would put that on the internet. Just that might be a little too much. You're on a list as of now. So at this point, what I'm going to start doing is playing with color. And if you know anything about me when it comes to daylight greens, I have a lot of strong opinions. It's very easy to make your greens look fake. It's very easy to make them look bad. It's very easy to lose them in the yellows of the image. And so I pay special attention to my greens and in both hue, well, in all of these situations. And a lot of times what I'm actually doing is desaturating my greens, but giving them a lot more like aqua in their undertones. This is some secret sauce that I'm sharing. And then playing with luminance as well. And depending on kind of how the lighting is structured, like a lot of times I'll go really dark with the greens just because I want that separation from the bright yellows. But in this image, I actually want the greens to pop a little bit more. So I'm going to bring those up slightly. And a lot of my daylight color management is just managing the relationship between orange, yellow, and green. I think that is the most important part of something like this, is getting the right separation between the two. And even when I have an image that has really strong orange and really strong yellow, a lot of times what I'm going to do is pick one to be kind of the focus and then mute the other one significantly. That's a thing that I've been doing for years and years and years. You'll see like here swung more orange. In a lot of cases, I'll just get rid of yellow entirely, or I'll get rid of orange entirely. It just kind of depends on which one is stronger in the image and which one has a little bit more detail in it. Like this one had really pretty orange in the rocks. This one has really pretty orange in the sunset, so I'll make that a little bit more bold, and then you can see I took a lot of the color out of the yellow and made it more white. So we're going to do something similar here, but in reverse. I think we're actually going to take orange down in saturation in this case. Well, maybe not. I actually really like the orange. Is it yellow down? It's yellow down. We're going to bring yellow down. Yellow and orange, they're tough because also orange is the most predominant color in skin. And so I think more often than not, I'm taking yellow out of images. But the older I've gotten, the more I really appreciate yellow, especially since so many of my images are centered around either the sky or the water. That yellow as a just as a contrasting color is really powerful. And you also have more yellow than you think in things like grass and trees and stuff like that. So you do have to be careful here. And since green is already fairly desaturated, this is where I get more like desaturate green more, maybe bring yellow back in, just slightly bumped, and then orange we're going to go heavier on, and that creates a nice gradient between the three, where you can see green, yellow, orange, versus if these are all in similar spots, they all kind of run together and make more brown. So orange, we may go up a little higher. Yellow, we may go slightly higher. And then green, we're going to bring down in saturation. But because we're adding more aqua into it, it's going to look like a more lush green at the same time. And this is, I will literally spend hours on an image getting these perfect. And I blame Alex Stroll. I'm going to bring up one more quick image here because there's a picture that he made that, let's see, personal, I think. There's an image that he posted, this is years ago, that changed green and yellow for me. This is one of them. You can see exactly what I'm talking about here in that he muted the yellows and the greens, but he added that aqua into the green, and then the oranges are more prominent in the tree trunks, and even back here you can see kind of the darker oranges, and we haven't touched luminance yet, so this is all going to start to pop in a similar way. But this photo, So he desaturated the yellows and then luminenced the fuck out of them so that they are basically glowing. And then you've got the greens, which have been turned significantly more aqua than I'm personally comfortable with. But when you're kind of sat back from this, it looks really beautiful. And it goes like this blue into this deep green, and then it pops out into this yellow. And then the oranges as well. They don't look like they've been given extra saturation, but in terms of luminance, they've been brought down to add a little bit more shadow into the yellows. It's almost like the orange is acting as the shadow in the yellows. And this image, I saw this in probably 2013. It's an old photo, and honestly, like, Alex has gotten a lot better since then too. You've got some like extra blue around the trees and stuff that I don't think he would leave in there these days. This is one of my favorite photographers of all time. But this photo, this one and this one together got posted in an image set and blew me away and really made me understand more about, just from studying them, this relationship between the yellow, the orange, and the green, and how important it is. And you can see he does different things in each image. So this is much more orange. The yellows have been almost completely cut out saturation wise. They're not as luminant. And then the greens are actually the other direction. He went down on saturation, but he turned them a little bit more yellow, and he buffed the luminance on them. So you can get these crazy different effects in very similar locations and similar lighting just by playing with those three colors in a natural setting. And like here, he completely took out green and yellow and he made it more orange, and that orange is bouncing off the blue in a very complementary way. It's beautiful. Same thing here. He took a lot of that yellow and that green out. They look dead. You can make trees look dead by just getting rid of green. And it's going to look more like a fall or like a winter sort of a scene. Same thing here. The yellows are desaturated. The oranges are probably also desaturated because he's really focused on the mountain here, but you still get a bit of that complementary color. So this is one of my favorite photographers for landscapes to study how he does color, because I think he does it immaculately. And things tend to lean a little bit more blue with him, but even then there's like this image probably had significantly more blue out of camera, but he white balanced it and then went way more orange with it to really make this pop. So I come back to this page. Obviously I found these images pretty quick. I come back to look at these, specifically these two images, but honestly the whole set is beautiful. That's another one of my favorites. But those two images, every time that I'm struggling with greens, I go look at those, and then I come back in and I start playing with these. So in this case, like, we could make our yellows pop like that, similar to how Alex does. We could go really bright, and we could bring oranges down more to give more of that shadowy yellow effect. I actually like oranges being slightly up here so that we don't lose all the detail in this wall, and we can make yellows almost clip out completely here. And the way they blend into the green there and then blend into the green here is the relationship that I'm looking at when I'm playing with sliders and stuff like that. And I may actually, because of that yellow being so bright, I may actually bring greens down here now. And that's going to, it changes so much of the image without really realizing what you're doing here. And I love it. I love that. I think that's my favorite sort of triangle of similar images. Hey, thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Playing with colors is always my least favorite thing. It's my favorite because it's so intricate, but this is also, like, I'll get to this point in editing an image, and this is where I'll stop, because I'll spend 2 hours right here and my eyes will start to do some weird stuff. But this is really where I like to, this is, I think, the biggest overall difference maker. And if I had to, honestly, it's the luminance sliders. If you just play with your luminance sliders, that makes such a huge difference in the overall image. It's unreal how much kind of like detail and pop you can get out of just those. So this is my favorite place to play. And you know, it gets even deeper and deeper when you get into the color grading on top of that. But yeah, I could sit in these sliders for just years. I think just the relationship between color is really interesting, and even like just how significant the temperature of an image is subconsciously. Um, if I were to bring this way up to being more orange or way down to being more cool, like that plays such a significant role in just the initial impact of a photo before you even start getting more detailed and looking at what's actually in it. Um, you get a feeling immediately from color and from warmth and temperature and like the contrast between them, that shadow, highlight, color. So this is, I think this is the most important part of an image is tweaking the color in such a way that it doesn't look unnatural and it doesn't look terrible. That's I don't know if anybody's hit the skill ceiling on that. I think that it's just something that everybody's gonna do a little bit differently, and depending on how much time you want to spend on it, it's always going to come out a little bit differently for different people. So let's see. I want to touch a few of these things. I want to see what my aquas are doing, and honestly, I'm going to push them a little bit more aqua. My blues, obviously that stream is reading very blue. I don't want to look like Havasupai or whatever Arizona place is called, but I do want to have a little bit more aqua in it than the blue is giving, just to brighten up the water a little bit. Saturation then we can play with. Once again, don't want it to be too blue, but that doesn't look unnatural to me. Sound off if you disagree. I'm open to that, but personally I don't think that looks too cooked. Not a lot of red in this image, not a lot of purple or magenta, so we're going to leave those alone. And then we're going to go in here and see how this does with... So aqua is just around these very fringes of the water, and this dude's shorts. We can get a little bit more light play on the surface of the water right around here if we buff aqua up, but it's really not impacting the image that much. If anything, it's just giving the rapids a little bit more highlight, which I like. And then the blue is where we're going to get, and this is where you have to be careful because you are hitting the sky as well. So you don't want to bring it down too much. You don't want to bring it up too much. You're going to lose a lot of detail in both of those things. I do like bringing it up slightly because I don't mind losing a little bit of these clouds and making it look a little brighter in order to have more detail and brightness in the water surface here. But we're not going to overdo that one. And then we get into this. And the first time that I edited this image, I don't think that this existed within Lightroom. So we're going to have some fun with this. This is our midtones. That's going to hit the majority of the image. And we can really play with what do we want this to give us a feeling of. If we go more purple magenta, it's going to feel more kind of summery, maybe even southwestern. Same if we're going up here, although this is more like high summer or even in Oregon, and that kind of looks nice. I kind of like having more orange yellowy in the highlights. If you go more green blue, that's going to tend to do a little bit better if it's not a bright sunlight day, but it also does some cool things to the rocks. So kind of just find your sweet spot here. And this is going to be one of those situations where I'm going to find what I like and then I'm going to tone it way down. So I may put the saturation, I was looking at this at like a 40 saturation, 30 saturation. I'm going to bring this down to like a 10. If that, like a 9. And we can turn these off and on just to see, like that's a very subtle, but it just sort of brightens up the rocks. And we're going to do the same thing with shadows here. This one's going to be interesting. A lot of times for these daylight, more summery images, I'm going to be throwing like red or orange into the shadows just because it warms up the image a little bit more. And you can see if you go like green in the shadows or blue even, you can cool some things down and it gives a cool effect. And green is also a fantastic color for shadows. I don't typically do a lot of blue or purple just because shadows already are going to be blue or purple. But this just sort of helps to offset some of that in the image if you're going more on like the red, yellow, orange side of things. So because we're in sandstone, because it's summer, it's bright sunlight, I'm going to add a little bit of orange into the highlights here. And we can check this out. Yeah, I like that. It brightens things up a little bit. Highlights, I really don't like to touch in daylight that much just because it tends to, like you can see the surface of the water is getting hit pretty heavily here, and it's going to be really extreme. You know, sometimes I'll put a bit of like a yellowy, creamy, very, very unsaturated color in there. Honestly, I'm not minding like a green just to make the greens and yellows separate a little bit more. I would bring the saturation even down further than this though, maybe like an 8. We can see what this looks like. Yeah, and what I need to do is put this on a white background. That actually looks pretty sweet. So let's go back to darker gray here. And then we can look at blending this. I might go a little down on this one. Might go down to like a 45 here. Don't need a ton of denoising here, but I am going to throw like 10 in there just to make sure that the shadows here aren't getting too grainy. Chromatic aberration isn't really going to make a big difference. Don't have a lot of edges that are, well, maybe we are actually. Yeah, we'll turn it on. Might as well. Might as well just check these on every image just for dramatic effect. And I'd say things are looking pretty good here. We haven't done any masks. I am going to do a few things here where we are going to draw a linear gradient. Because the sun is coming in, but it's blocked by this rock, we've got some interesting light stuff going on. So what I'm going to do is bring one up from this corner and just sort of match it onto the line of the cliff and sort of where the light starts hitting. And this may be something like going darker. I don't want to go too dark, but I do like that sort of leading you into the image feeling that you get from doing a slightly darker gradient on the bottom of the photo. And then what I might do is go in with another linear gradient and come at it like this way, kind of keeping on the similar lines, but we do want a little bit of overlap. And then what this one's going to do is something similar, but opposite, right? We're going to come a little brighter on this one. And actually, wait a minute. I think I'm going to go darker. I'm not going to get as much contrast in it. Let's go, hold on. What are we doing here? This is where just tweaking and playing with stuff, and you know, I came in with this preconceived notion of how I was going to do this, but I honestly think it looks cooler. Ooh, we can bring the blacks down to really make the shadows look more dramatic. If I come in here, let's see, contrast up slightly, highlights up slightly, but then bring shadows a little bit down. White's a little bit up, blacks a little bit down. I don't think we want the blacks down. I think we want the blacks slightly raised. And actually what I'm going to do is throw a third one in. We're going to come this way. We're bringing out all the stops on this one. So overall exposure I'm going to bring down. Contrast I'm going to bring up slightly. Highlights I'm also going to bring up slightly. And then we're going to play with shadows until we get this foreground right where we want it. There. How does this look? So it's a lot brighter without these, but I really like the detail that we're bringing in. Honestly, maybe this is actually going brighter. No, it's not. It's not. It might be this first one that we need to touch. This one might need to be not so dark. I like that. We can bring the temp. Ooh, yeah. We can make that water more blue at the bottom. Same with this one. Bring this down slightly. So that shadow really casts more blue. And then when we come up here, maybe we do this a little bit warmer up at the top. And that's just going to make the difference between where the sun's hitting the rocks and where it's in shadow. It's going to be much more warm, cool. And once we're done with those, we can play with exposure now. So I may want to brighten this overall image just barely. We are going to get a little bit of clipping in those highlights now, so we can bring that down slightly. Still going to get a little bit, but I really don't care about a little bit of clipping, especially if it's not super in the image. So now, since this is so much rock on this side and the people are slightly off center and it's a little jarring, I'm going to bring this over. And if I were to crop anything here, I want to crop the top. And I'm going to go till the corner kind of meets this part of the image here. Because I don't want to lose foreground. I would rather lose kind of gross sky that doesn't add anything to the photo. And that came in way too far. So we're going to come back out and back up. Let's see how that looks. Still a little off. That waterfall... Maybe it's just a little bit from this, and then we actually bring this one in slightly too. That looks nice. Okay. So for this one, trying to think of how much it really needs in Photoshop. I want to look at the before and after. So you can see the before and after. We really made a lot of this stuff pop. The colors are significantly better. We could even go a little bit less saturated across the board. This is one of those things where once you've been staring at it for a little too long, it starts to be less dramatic in your head than it is on the actual image. This is about where I would want to leave this one at this point. But also, we do have a little bit of softness around some things. So this maybe could use a high-pass filter. But I don't really want to do that right now. So we're going to go ahead and label this on a 4. Maybe a 3. We'll call this a 3. And that just means take this into Photoshop later, Aaron. So we've got 2 that we've done. We're starting to push 9 p.m. I do need to go to bed pretty soon, so we're not going to do anything too intensive from this point on. Maybe take more of a flat image and just speed through it so you can see what I'm doing quickly when I'm going through stuff. I think that maybe something like this would be a good one. This is very different from any of the images that we've looked at thus far. First thing I'm looking at, are we centered? We're pretty well centered, but I hate this. Is that something I want to take out in Photoshop later? Probably. One thing that I'll do in some of these situations, if it's just a very minute tweak, the auto transform on this is actually pretty good. It's a little too much. I'm losing too much of the image on either side. I think I'm going to leave it. But let's start just kind of flying through this. So we're going to bring exposure up. We're going to bring contrast up. And in these Nordic countries, you can get away with a lot more contrast. Highlights we can bump a little bit because we're dealing with a cloudy, diffuse sky. Shadows, I kind of like having darker. Whites we're going to bring up as well. If you're looking at this, we're not clipping whatsoever, so we're doing pretty well here. Blacks are clipping slightly, which is fine. I'm going to leave the blacks on a -4. not losing any detail here. If I were to go in and crop, I would bring this up so that the lighthouse sits on the third line, and maybe crop this down so that that top bar sits on the third line. See how that looks. Jump in clarity. We know that 14 is just a good starting point, and that looks pretty dang good, so we're going to leave it there. Dehaze, you can see dramatically how much that changes the photo here. So we're going to be very, very light-handed on the dehaze here. I'm thinking like a 6 or a 7. Yeah, I think a 7 gives us the perfect amount of like edge clarity on things without losing sort of the dreaminess of the scene. And what I'm going to do in Photoshop later is get rid of this. Tyler, you said you wanted to see a little goblin. Well, there he is. That's our goblin. In this case, vibrance I like because the colors are so muted. Even if you crank this to 100, it really doesn't look that bad. I'm not going to do that, obviously, but we can get away with something like mid-30s to mid-40s. And I think I'm going to go kind of mid-30s here. And then we're going to look at saturation. And saturation, we can also, because these colors are so muted, really all we're fighting is the lighthouse looking kind of yellowy and even kind of dirty compared to where it was. So we're going to try to play that out of the image in the HSL in a minute. We can also start to play with the color. So this is a more Nordic country. I think I'm going to want to go a little bit more cool with this image. And that'll also help to take out some of the yellow that was coming into the lighthouse stucco there. All right. Getting into curves. I don't want to lose the moodiness of the image, but I do want to be able to see details. So we're going to do a very slight S-curve. We're going to bring highlights just barely up, and then we're really going to pay attention in our shadow details here. We may even put more than one curve down here. I'm going to bring this up just barely so that we don't lose shadow detail, and we're going to try to, because this has like some clumps and some rocks and a lot of shadows, I may actually buff the shadows up slightly so that that looks just a little bit flatter. See if you bring the shadows down, that's going to be more obvious. If you bring it up too far, you're going to lose detail. I like something sort of in this region with those. This is getting very Wes Anderson-y, very lifted shadows, flat centered image, and I love it. I fucking love it. Okay. HSL, we're going to fly through this. Red is pretty true red. I kind of want that tinted slightly orange. Orange in the dirt. We don't want it to be red, but we do want it to be like true orange. Yellows in the lighthouse. You can see the dirty part of the lighthouse as well as in the grass. How much of it's really interesting the more you play into this yellow, green, orange relationship, just how much of grass is actually yellow and not green technically. So in this case, this is summer in Iceland, but we don't want to lose our green. So I'm actually going to buff this pretty significantly towards green, and then we'll play out the saturation later to give it more of that like Nordic green color, similar to what Alex Stroll was doing there. Although we don't want to lose the dandelions, so maybe we're going to bring this down a little bit more. We're going to bring saturation significantly down still. Orange, we're going to bring up a little bit just to balance. Green, we're going to bring a little bit more aqua, but we're also going to bring that saturation pretty significantly down. And frequently my greens are in the like -60s in terms of their saturation, because they still read green. It's just they don't need to be like, you get too green and it's very obvious how green things are, that you're overdoing it. So we are gentle with our greens. That's the moral of the story here. Aqua, that's our window shadows there. Little bit of stuff in the sky, not a whole lot. I don't mind leaning this more blue, and then blue we can play with as well. And I typically tend to lean my blues anywhere from -5 to -10 towards aqua. I just think that it looks more true blue and it looks good. So I like to do that personally. And even after doing that, though, I may bring this up slightly. Just 50. 50 gets us in the right spot. You can see a lot of bouncing back and forth between things as you make tweaks. Getting into saturation, we don't want aqua to be overpowering, but we do like that color in the windows. Well, do we? I do. I do like that color in the windows. And blue, we don't want to be overpowering, but we also don't want to completely lose it. I'm liking like a -5 there. Not a lot of purple, not a lot of magenta. That's the beauty of shooting a lot of landscape stuff. Very infrequently do you have to deal with a ton of purple and magenta. It will be in rocks occasionally, but not super bad for the most part. Then we get into the fun stuff. The luminance is my favorite set of sliders in the program. It so dramatically changes how the image looks. I like a slight buff on both of those. We can bring greens. Ooh, there's a lot of green in the lighthouse actually, and less so in the actual grass. Let's put this at a 50, just so that this is closer to white. We aren't getting as much like dirtiness in there. Aqua, we're really just making the windows a little brighter. That's not a huge deal. Blue is going to be huge. We don't want to blow it out. We also don't want to make it nasty, crunchy. So we're going to bring this up a decent amount. And actually that may make me want to do more. No, we're going to leave blues where they were. That looks nice. Purple, once again, not a whole lot in here. And then we're going to get into our shadows. So cloudy day, highlights are already a little blue. Shadows are already a little blue, green, purpley, somewhere in there. So this is where this is going to make a significant difference. And I'm really looking at the lighthouse and the grass when I'm sort of circling around here, seeing what I want to do. This looks like Mars when you're looking at the dirt. But this looks too, like, gloomy. So maybe we're going to sit somewhere in this, like, yellow to green area on shadows. I think that's my favorite of the looks here. And it just sort of gives it a textural quality that I really enjoy. But this needs to be very, very subtle. Very, a little bit more punch than that. Honestly, I think we need to go more yellow. Maybe even more into orange territory. Let's look at orange. Bring this down. There we go. It's looking nice. Yeah, very subtle change. Same with midtones. Because we know that we're picking up a lot of green in the lighthouse and also a little bit of yellow, I'm tempted to go the other direction. Throw some like blue-purple in there at a very light saturation just to make once again, the white of the lighthouse look more true white. And it's, again, very subtle, but that's where we want it to sit. Highlights, this is mostly just the sky. We could throw yellow into there just to make it look less like gloomy. We could also lean more into the gloom. And actually, I kind of like that. Like, just a little bit. Just a smidge. Maybe there. And then we're going to play with the lux on this a little bit. So we can bring the lux up. On the shadows, we may want to come down Yeah, I like coming down more like 20s. And then midtones. What do we want to do with midtones? I kind of like going up, but we don't want to lose the lighthouse in the sky. So something like that. So you can see the color grading, very subtle, but it does sort of just give it a cinematic quality that I really personally enjoy quite a bit. Okay, didn't do this at the beginning, should have done this at the beginning. Here's our sharpening. Already got the profile corrections, that's good. Not a lot of noise in this photo, but we can always do just like a quick 10 just to give it a little bit of airiness, and kind of looks like it's been like glossed over with like a matte cream coat, like a, you know what I mean? Maybe you don't. To me, it looks that way. And that's pretty much gonna do it on this guy. This is one that we're gonna bring into Photoshop and do a little bit more work on. We're gonna remove the goblin down here and the wires. Probably gonna remove this from the roof, and could even remove the tank here if we were getting really into it, just to leave the lighthouse on this. Would probably go in and paint out more of these dandelions as well. And I would definitely do something with the sky. I'm not quite sure what that would be yet. You can get into like really intensive, replace the entire sky with a sunset if you wanted to. Because the clouds are obscuring the mountains though, I don't want to get rid of it being cloudy. I just don't want it to be flat like this. So it may be something like a high pass filter that just adds back in a little bit more contrast on the dimension in the clouds to make it look a little bit more dramatic. It may also be adding in like some light coming through, which could be really nice. You can see these birds flying through too, so maybe we add in some birds that are closer up. I don't really know. I sort of started this one without really knowing where I want to take it. And now sometimes you just have to sit with an image for a little while before you really know what you're doing with it. And I think this is one of those situations. I do know that I want this foreground to be darker, not so dark that you can't see what's going on, but definitely a little darker than it is. I also know that I don't want to lose the flowers entirely, so we're going to play with this a little bit. It's like blacks up, shadows down again. That's going to be our bread and butter here, to just sort of flatten that out. And we can do a similar... Let's see. This one might be a good one to do the select the sky. And then we play with that. So it's not perfect. It's going to mess with the lighthouse a little bit. But we do want to play with this slightly. And I think that's bringing it down. If we want more drama, we can add in a little bit more contrast. We can also play with the color temperature on the sky, which can add some interesting effects. Like if we wanted to be a lot more blue and have the lighthouse stand out from it a little bit more, which I actually like. I like doing like a -5 here. That's pretty cool. Bring the shadows up just slightly. I wonder... There's a lot of black in that. We don't want it to look like a 2011 Instagram filter though, so we're gonna bring that up slightly. Whites, we want this to be a little more creamy than like blown out highlights, so we're gonna bring that down. Highlights really kind of, honestly, these could get slid either direction depending on my mood on the day. That sounds stupid, but it's true. It totally changes based on how I'm feeling on that day. I think I want a little bit more saturation in the sky, but not a lot. Once again, so much of my editing style these days is like just subtlety, subtle changes. You don't want it to be overly dramatic. You also don't want it to be, a change that you didn't need to make because it was pointless. So that's looking pretty nice. I wonder what this is compared to the preview. So there you go. There's before and after just on sort of color and stuff. And now that I'm seeing it, I'm not loving how much blue saturation is in there. So we're going to bring blue saturation down. It's still going to be cool toned, but we don't want like blue shining through. You know what I mean? So this is nice. This just looks like it's brightened up. It's gotten a little bit of a facelift. And when we bring it into Photoshop, we're going to get some of these distracting details taken out as well. Unfortunately, talking through these takes a lot more time than I anticipated. And granted, this is the first time that I'm doing this, so I think that as I do this a little bit more, I'm going to learn how to keep things a little bit more concise and roll through them. But I'm pretty happy with where we got things to today. I was hoping to fully finish 3 images, 3 to 5. Obviously did not get there. However, we did get 3 images pretty damn close to done. This one's done. Happy with this. This looks great. It was a great example of sort of a challenging astro photo. And if I unstack this and you can see this one before and after, like we started at this. So to go from there all the way to the final image, feeling very good about that. This is one of my favorite places in the world, and I love the color in this image. This is another one of my favorite photos I've ever taken. It wasn't like dramatic change here, but I do love the tones that the orange and the yellow that come out, and then how they interact with the green down here. Whereas this is kind of a flat, gross spring green. We get a little bit more pleasant coloration, and the relationship between those is played up a lot here. And then you've got the blue current running through that divides it, that I think is just great. This one, honestly, it's just a photo I've never edited before, and I was looking through a bunch of my photos to see what we could edit today, and this one popped up, and I was like, yeah, why not? This looks cool. And honestly, looking at the edit, I would like to make this kind of do more of like an orange to blue-green on the grass where it crests the hill. So in our gradients here, I may do something more like making it more orange at the bottom, just barely, like going to a 10 there. But then we go into green HSL, and maybe we're going like way more aqua. Since we've taken saturation so far down, we have to be a little bit more dramatic in hue if we want that to come through. And even maybe we bring saturation back in. Well, no, I kind of like it really muted. We're going to do like a 70 here, which is pretty significant. And then our luminance, we could even, oh no, because that's losing it in the lighthouse. So we're going to do it here. This is one that in Photoshop I would probably do a little differently. I would play with that interaction a lot more. But I like, see, this is that sort of Alex Stroll. How do you get the yellows and the greens interacting? How do you get the luminance to really bring out? So like here, I could bring the luminance way up here, and then even bring the luminance on the oranges more down, and that would achieve a similar effect. There's a lot of different paths you can take to similar effects. It's just how do they interact with each other that's important. Yeah, and you can see that this trifecta in every image, landscape-wise, is going to be very important. So we can even bring saturation here up. Bring saturation here down. Oh, I like that a lot. I like that a lot. gorgeous. I wonder if red... Oh no, red's at the top of the lighthouse. And we should make that pop a little bit. There we go. Yeah, that's nice. See how we've muted the greens, but they're kind of a blue-green, and then the yellow still pops, but then this orange is more of a dark. And when you look at the kind of the mini version of the image over here, the thumbnail, it becomes a lot more obvious what I'm talking about. Even here, it's like this gradient of color that really, it's just interesting. And then the blue of the sky bouncing off of the orange of the foreground. So yeah, I'm happy with how these landed. Thank you all for tuning in. Obviously, we didn't fully finish the last two that we edited, but very happy with the one that we did. I'll plan to finalize these maybe on a future stream. I have a lot of images that I have picked out to do edits on moving forward. This was just a bunch that I flagged for today's stream. I think in the future, I haven't touched this in a long time. My camera's doing dumb shit. Oh! Completely forgot about that. Sorry, y'all. I think in the future, my plan was to kind of get through as many of these as I could and then move any that I hadn't touched into next stream. So in this case, we only finished one. I'm not going to move 36 images in. I think I'm going to take the ones that I'm most excited to edit, move those into a catalog for next stream, and maybe add in a few more that are either similar or that I've been meaning to work on for a while. And then we'll continue kind of doing this. I think it's fun for me to edit variety. A lot of times when I go out and shoot astro, then I'm stuck editing just astro for, you know, however many days it takes me to get done with that set. So this is a much more entertaining way for me to sort of bounce around and get a bunch of different things done and keep it fresh and keep it fun. So I think in the future, if I'm streaming for 2-3 hours at a time, I'd like to get through 2 to 3 images at a time, maybe a little less commentary next time, a little bit more just editing and sort of answering questions if they come in. But I think I'm going to stick to this idea of get an astro image done, get a kind of a bright daylight, sunny sunset, something like that, and then get one of these more moodier, cloudy, diffused images so that we're hitting kind of the big three lighting types that I'm typically shooting under. And subject matter will change depending on kind of what I'm feeling day of, but that's how I would like for these streams to go in the future. And it'll keep things interesting, it'll keep things fun, and that's what I need because of ADHD. And by the end of the year, we'll have a fully revamped portfolio with, you know, a bunch of stuff. I've got thousands and thousands of astrophotography images. I've got thousands and thousands of images from the coast. Same, obviously, landscapes. We've got a lot of stuff we can go through over the next year. And people and places and things. So this is going to be fun. I'm hoping that those of you that tuned in today enjoyed the stream. Hoping that you enjoyed the subject matter. Hope you learned something. If not, great. You're better at editing pictures than I am. This is just a fun way for me to stay engaged and make sure that I get a little bit of stuff done every single week until we finalize a new website, new portfolio. So thank you all for tuning in. I think I'm going to end it there. I'm tired. I'm an old man. I go to bed early. But this was a lot of fun. So thank you. And I think that I'm going to try to do about 3 of these a week. I think my schedule moving forward is going to be something like Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. That may be subject to change, but that's what I'm going to try to stick to moving forward. And if we stay on that schedule and we get stuff done every week, we're going to be very, very far ahead of if I didn't do these, because I tend to stop editing pictures halfway through when I get frustrated with the HSL panel. So anyway, good night to those of you still tuned in. Thank you all for tuning in. I will catch you very soon.